Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. My name is Anusha Shaigan. I'm a human rights and technology lawyer. I'm based in Lahore, Pakistan. I currently serve as the COO of Quoting the Law, which is Pakistan's first legal news and analysis portal. And we have various initiatives that improve access to justice through various technology-enabled platforms. Other than that, I'm also serving on the government's Web3 committee, which has been tasked to come up with a regulatory framework for Web3 technologies, including the metaverse and perhaps cryptocurrency as well, but we don't know yet. I also serve on a government board, which is the Punjab Food Authority. And other than that, I'm a fellow of the Atlantic Council's Millennium Leadership Program, which is a DC-based think tank, and it involves NATO countries. But as a Pakistani, I'm looking forward to learning more on how to contribute best. We have some excellent speakers with us today who are going to be speaking about the legal issues surrounding startups in Pakistan. And I'm just going to quickly introduce them. So we have with us Taimur Malik, who is also my boss. He is a partner at Clyde Co. He works in the Middle East and Africa and Pakistan, but also looks after the Clyde Co's global practice. Taimur can shed some more light on where he is right now and what he's up to. Other than that, he focuses on, he advises governments, sovereign wealth funds, financial institutions, listed companies, Fortune 500 companies, and a wide range of issues, including arbitration, litigation, mediation, government concessions, infrastructure projects, corporate governance, capital market matters, M&As, joint ventures across Asia, Middle East, and Africa. We are also joined by Altaf Qureshi. He is a partner at Ijaz Ahmed and Associates. He is also a co-founder of PakSign.pk and Vukla. So PakSign is an e-signature platform, and it also includes Asan ID, providing e-KYC solutions. We will ask you more on how that works. And Vukla is a software as a solution-based solution for contract automation, archiving, and digital transaction management. We are also joined by Mubarak Siddiqui. I'm sure a lot of you know him because he advises a lot of startups. He is an independent legal practitioner, and he works with early stage businesses and investors in the technology industry. He focuses on non-contentious matters pertaining to general corporate advisory, finance, acquisitions, banking, media law, competition law, IP law, with a primary focus on startups and early stage businesses. And he has acted for various eminent startups and investors to structure and negotiate seed stage equity financing. So welcome everybody. To start off, can we please have all the speakers give a brief comment on what the startup landscape looks like? Maybe perhaps start with the positives, and then we can go into more details. Thank you. Taimur, should we start with you?
Ji, sure. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and Ashad, thank you very much for a very generous introduction. I think Pakistan's startup scene is at a stage where we've seen other countries maybe a decade ago. So Pakistan has gone through its hurrah moment initially, jahan pe in the last 2 years we saw a lot of investments coming in from foreign VCs as well as local family offices and VCs into the ecosystem. And then we saw news of certain closures in the startup industry. And that initially led people to think that perhaps this was the end of the startup boom in Pakistan. Obviously, that's not the case. It's a market correction. It's a much needed correction in many ways, perhaps. Pakistani startups are primed to keep growing and attract more local and foreign investment in the days and months to come. in the middle of all the chaos, I've had 2 startup calls during the day to day. And so the real startups, the ones with a proper sustainable business model and revenue stream, are going to stay and are going to grow. So I think that's where I see the market. The real players will stay and grow in this market. From an investor point of view, I represent a lot of investors. I see appetite to invest, and they're just looking for the right deals. And hence, the legal discussion today, and I'm glad to be joined by Altaf and Mubarak, perhaps 2 people who need no introduction in this field from a legal perspective, and look forward to contributing to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Taimur. Altaf, what do you think the Pakistani startup landscape looks like?
Thank you, Anusha, and thank you for the introduction. While I have practiced law for 25 years almost in the US, UK, UAE, prior to even Pakistan, I'm actually a founder of my own startup, co-founder, that is also legally qualified. So I think I come from a sort of founder perspective more than a legal perspective. What I think is one very large positive in the market right now is that founders of startups are becoming confident and more mature. So they're understanding the landscape better, they understand the opportunity better, they're able to commercialize and monetize that, see which way to head and approach. In the early days, there was a lot of PR or a lot of sort of general discussions around what could happen, what could not happen, a lot of dreaming. Now it's getting much more tangible, it's getting much more real. And that's exciting because I've always pushed for Pakistani startups to be international in scope and in consideration. So I hope that confidence and maturity takes them all the way there. And as Taimur said, you have a great, and Anusha and Mubarak all put together are very good at giving us this direction. So I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Altaf. Mubarak, are you around? Yes. You're muted.
Hi guys, sorry, I'm in a plane which is supposed to land much earlier, but it got delayed. But here I am. No, I'd like to echo a lot of what Taimur and Altaf already said. There's not much new that I can add to their perspective, because I think we're all familiar with a lot that we're seeing in Pakistan. That is, one thing that I would like to add is that we're now at a normal stage. Last year was not normal. Last year was the extraordinary bit. Before that, if we remember, before they were all in a stage that was similar to this, but this current period is still better, right? Because now we've had some sort of validation. We've had companies that have raised substantial amount of capital. We've had founders that have gone and raised further subsequent rounds as well. And we're finally at the stage where we're seeing some consolidation efforts happening. We're seeing businesses growing. So I think it's overall very positive. If we were going to look at the anomaly of last year and look at today in those relevant relative to last year, then we'd always be happy, or we'd be unhappy for a very long time, because last year's euphoria, I don't expect it to get replicated anytime soon. But anyhow, happy to contribute to this conversation further.
Sure, thank you. I hope everybody who's watching realizes that how tensed we all are right now, because Taimur's just come back from a very tight political situation. Mubarak's flight got delayed. I just came back from an awards dinner, hence the sparkles. And Altaf is, of course, not in Pakistan right now. So just to take the conversation forward, Taimur, do you think the political situation in the country would affect investor confidence in Pakistani startups?
Well, I think it shouldn't, and we shouldn't allow it to impact the Pakistani ecosystem. And as I said, that I spent the last 6 hours, in the room next to Imran Khan's room, and then attended his live press briefing, and then the interaction with the foreign media. But before that, I was making time trying to speak to startups who had scheduled calls with me earlier. And I've literally rushed to attend this webinar as well. So I think whatever is happening on the political front, it can be, of course, disturbing. It can create issues. It can harm investor confidence. But we are a country of 220 million people. People still have to move. People still have to eat. People still have to earn their honest wage. And therefore, I feel that this ecosystem will keep evolving. And we should all just grow a thicker skin and be in the middle of that all, and not allow certain events, regardless of which side of the events you sympathize with, allow them to disrupt what feeds us. So I think from that perspective, I feel that this will go on. And if anything, just the fact that despite everything, people will still reaching out to have those conversations. Today, people are still joining us, on the webinar today. All the speakers are present here. I think that's a very encouraging sign, and I thank you all for being here as well.
Thank you. Altaf, what do you think of the political or legal situation in Pakistan as far as your own startups are concerned? And if you can tell us a bit more about them as well. Did you have issues in raising funds or attracting investors given our political or legal climate? I mean, there are positives, of course, but what is your take on this?
No, on this front, I'm actually very positive. If you're in developed markets, as I'm sure a lot of our attendees will know, many people say the best businesses are made in recessions. So having a perfect economic climate is not a prerequisite by any means. In Pakistan's case, after speaking to a number of investors, many of them believe that the best companies in the emerging markets are made during political instability, because that's what attracts the attention of those startups. They address real issues that people face because the government is unable to, for example. So it's really not a detriment in my mind. And let's also be clear, right? I mean, the exposure to the country from a legal or financial perspective, it can be quite limited because of the foreign holding company structure, drip feeding it into the operating company in Pakistan. So there are ways to protect yourself if you need to worry about such things. But all in all, I would say that the politics in Pakistan is not an impediment to raising investment. What is the actual impediment is finding a business model that works, a sustainable, profitable business model that works. If you can achieve that domestically, internationally, then it really doesn't make a difference if you're in Pakistan.
Right, thank you. Mubarak, what do you think? Have you had issues with the law while giving advice to startups? Have you had issues with the legal system or attracting investors or advising investors or vice versa?
So my view is slightly different. Political instability does have a big impact. It does not preclude anyone from raising investment. I think some founders are still raising investment, and they will, regardless of how bad things get. But generally, investors do operate on the basis of perception and sentiment. Instability, uncertainty is never a good show. And it's never a good sign. I know a lot of VCs and funds are struggling. I know when our markets free fall, when the rupee gets seriously devalued, when you keep changing, like when you change 3 finance ministers in 6 months, this is not a good sign generally. If you talk about small rounds, like couple of $1 million, I think those are still unaffected. Early stages are still unaffected, but as far as larger stages are concerned, as far as funds raising investment from other large LPs are concerned, those definitely have an impact, because if you look at the global markets today, the worst place to be today would be an illiquid asset class, a risky asset class, and then an asset class that is looking at a long-term play. And then on top of that, if you add emerging markets, and on top of emerging markets, you add an unstable emerging market, then we are talking about really just a very, very unattractive proposition to park capital in or to invest capital in. I'm not talking about from a global macroeconomic perspective or economic perspective. I'm talking about it from our political, which a lot of which is like self-induced or self-inflicted issues perspective. So it does have an impact, but credit to Pakistani entrepreneurs, they're doing what they can in spite of all of this. So yeah, the impact is there.
Right, thank you. Taimur, if you can share some insights on what foreign investors are thinking, or how would you as a lawyer have been, advising foreign investors or investments or VC funds?
I would just
and if you can also shed some light on some of the international laws in more recent times that we have come across, does FATF have any bearing on this, or does the Apostle Convention reduce a lot of legal issues that we've seen in the past? So from an international foreign investor perspective.
Absolutely. I'll just like to add something first to what Mubarak said. I mean, I don't disagree with him. I think political instability in a country does have an impact on investor confidence. However, unlike many other businesses, investors in startups anywhere in the world, they have a slightly stronger sense of the situation, and they are stronger appetite for risk taking and are taking a more long-term view. So I feel what we are seeing in Pakistan is eventually going to lead to the strengthening of the system in the country anyway. And as long as that is understood, I think our country risk gets reduced. And the Pakistan coming off the FATF grey list in the middle of all this political chaos is one good example of that. The process started in the previous government and ended in this government. And Pakistan is finally off the FATF grey list. So good things are also happening, because FATF, Pakistan being on the FATF grey list was perhaps a bigger issue, from a foreign investor point of view, in terms of getting dividends out of Pakistan, in terms of all the regulatory issues, bank account opening issues for startups, or Pakistani founders trying to open holding companies abroad, and then trying to open company bank accounts and personal bank accounts abroad. Coming from a country which is on the FATF grey list was a bigger challenge issue. So I think we should celebrate that Pakistan is no longer on the grey list. So, and that's all happened in the middle of this chaos. On what foreign investors look at and what I think concerns them, and I would like to highlight it. I guess most of the people in the session today, and many of those who will listen to the recording or view the recording later on, will be from the founder class or the startups in Pakistan. I would say that foreign investors are used to businesses operating in the West mainly. They believe what the founders are telling them. They rely on desktop due diligence, legal, financial, technical due diligence, and put their money on that basis. Pakistan, I mean, we are all Pakistani lawyers. We've done enough deals in the country to know how things work. I would urge people to do their due diligence internally from day one. Keep your books in order. Keep your contracts in order. If you're spending $500,000 on your technology and everything, don't shy away from spending some good money on proper legal and accounting support as well, because that's what will be needed when you will raise serious money, especially from foreign investors. Now, the problem is that if something goes wrong and then foreign investors have to initiate a due diligence or investigation into a startup, that does not reflect well on that startup or its founders or the Pakistani ecosystem. So I think that's something that needs to be considered. Having said that, the big investors, the big VC funds from around the world have gone to countries like Indonesia, Bangladesh, apart from India, of course, and have in the past decade, perhaps, maybe not now, witnessed similar or experienced similar things. So again, the risk appetite is there. But please, increase the level of your readiness for foreign investors, and that requires a focus on and attention on, having your legal documentation and your accounting books in proper order and without any exaggeration. So that's what I would like to point out.
Right. Altaf, your profile mentioned something on the lines of KYC. Can you explain what that is and how is that relevant to foreign investors and startups, and how important is it for startups to have their documents in order?
No, I completely second what Taimur say. But let me speak as a founder, like I said, two founders. First of all, let's just break down some myths. In the current climate, it's hard to start a quick commerce startup anywhere in the world now. So that's not unique to Pakistan. If I suddenly said I want to create a Careem equivalent or take on Careem, that's subsidizing ride hailing. That's going to be difficult wherever I am in the world. Pakistan, additionally hard. So ultimately, we are trying to determine what sells Pakistan well. And what sells Pakistan well, first and foremost, is talent. So once you have the talent established, your team, your co-founders, your tech support, whatever it might be, it's about then enveloping it into a business model, which not only goes after, let's say, a sector or business in Pakistan, but can potentially go international. Now, why am I saying international? Because if you focus only on domestic, then obviously you're going to be subject to the issues in Pakistan. Are there issues on the legal front and the legislation and the laws and the regulations? Without a doubt, there are tons of issues in Pakistan, much of which is, in my view, self-inflicted. There are many ways we could be doing better. For example, like you said, the Apostille Convention. It's a 1961 convention. We're acceding to it in 2023, not even 2022. So my question is not why are we acceding to a convention this old? My question is why aren't we moving towards blockchain? Why aren't we moving towards other methods of verifying authenticity of documents, or even electronic signatures, which is what PakSign is in? As everyone on the panel knows, there's a law from 2002 that enables electronic signatures. Yet domestically, trying to convert people is very difficult. So what I'm trying to get at is, yes, we can facilitate domestic legal issues. That's legal support, and you must definitely look at that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to point your commercial or business sort of arrows domestically. You can do so internationally. Obviously, we know about the the recent acquisition by DigitalOcean. That was of a SaaS business, and it's often been a sort of conundrum of mine. Why do we not have more SaaS businesses in Pakistan? Why are we only focused on startups that require significant funding, usually for unsustainable business models? So ultimately, the founder has a lot more control of their decision-making and their opportunities and outcomes. And they need to take advantage of what's available in Pakistan and find ways to avoid the issues that are in Pakistan.
Right, thank you. Mubaraz, if you are still with us, can you perhaps point out the top legal issues that investors might run into while they're trying to invest in Pakistan?
I am with you guys, but I'm just my camera. I'll have to switch off because I'm walking. See, they're two separate kinds of issues, right? When you talk about investing, Pakistan has a fairly liberal regime. They allow full repatriation. There's no minimum investment requirement, etc., etc. So we are fine on that front. But there are these issues to go and take those extra steps, right? Such as this getting everything notarized and then attested by the Pakistani embassy abroad. And I did meet some folks in embassies abroad. They don't have the internal procedures figured out themselves, right? Leaving blockchain and electronic signatures aside, why are we even requiring this authentication to begin with is my question, right? Countries like Singapore, etc., have moved beyond that. They don't require authentication of documents that are coming from another regulator because they can be authenticated either directly with that regulator, or you could just hold the people submitting the documentation responsible. So I think most of our issues are very common sense issues. If I put them in a lack of common sense issues, if I put them into one category, the other legal and regulatory issue category for me our inability to innovate as far as regulation is concerned, right? So some good steps with SECP's regulatory sandbox, but then we still haven't been able to have any sort of framework around crypto. I understand it's a difficult space to regulate. Most countries in the world are figuring it out still, but we could have done a bit more than what we have so far. So these are the two broad categories of legal or regulatory issues that I see in Pakistan, not just for investors but for founders.
Right. Thank you,
Anusha,
speakers. Yeah.
If I can add to that, and perhaps it'll answer a couple of the questions as well. Look, from a foreign investor point of view, when they're looking to invest in Pakistan, and if they are signing a safe agreement, I mean, how do you really enforce a safe agreement in Pakistan then? Right. So that's a question that's often asked of us. I mean, can they simply take the safe agreement to SECP and say, give us shares at the relevant
Sorry, Taimur, can you explain what a safe is for everybody who's not aware?
So it's a simple agreement for future equity, perhaps started by Y Combinator in the US as a form, as a simple agreement whereby people at pre-seed stage perhaps would give money to founders or startups. So and that has certain conditions based on which it could be converted into equity in the company at a future stage. So in Pakistan, obviously, if you sign that, and many of the Pakistani startups have signed these safe agreements, even with foreign investors and local investors, the problem is if something goes wrong, what protections do those foreign investors or local investors have who are relying on a safe agreement? So they will have to go to court, and the Pakistani court system, of course, is not considered to be the best in terms of contract enforcement. So foreign investors are a bit hesitant to do this. So they really have to believe, and they must be really believing in a startup and the founders to put their money in without taking equity up front, but instead just signing a safe agreement. So I think that is a concern. Then the thing is that money that comes into Pakistan, if it's invested in a Pakistani company level, it still needs to be registered as repatriable capital, so that dividend against that equity stake can be repatriated abroad, if in the case of a foreign investor. So all those challenges still remain. And if we have foreign currency exchange rules or issues like we had a few months ago, and State Bank is not giving prompt approvals to take foreign currency out of Pakistan, that again does not induce a lot of confidence in the foreign investors, and hence the return they would be looking at against their investment would be much higher than in relation to startups in countries which don't have these challenges. So I think those concerns remain, but contract enforcement is a big one. So which is why what we all said earlier, that startups need to make sure that everything is in order. They need to rely on lawyers, and proper accountants, etc., and tax advisors from the word go. Is that local and foreign investors are really putting a lot of faith in them when they're investing in a Pakistani startup.
Right. So thank you, speakers, for your insights. Yes.
Sorry, Anisha, can I just add something, because I think this is a very important
Yes, quickly.
topic. I agree with Morris, I agree with Taimur, but let's also discuss what people actually end up doing. What they actually end up doing is incorporating a company in Pakistan, which employs 10, 20, 50 people, and they pay the exact amount of money to pay those salaries and nothing more, nothing greater. So they limit their exposure to Pakistan because of all of these various issues, and they keep the money abroad. They keep it in a foreign holdco, sometimes not always in compliance with Pakistan law. Let's also be honest about that fact. And when they keep it abroad, then they face a dilemma, because they realize that they have something that's potentially bigger than just a Pakistan scenario. So they start to look into international expansion, and rightly so. So my point is that the laws that we have to deal with are leading to structures and jugars that these founders come up with to make the business work, notwithstanding the environment. And I appreciate as a lawyer that we should all try to comply with the law in Pakistan, but there is a point at which it was fundamentally against the interests of the startup or even the foreign investor. And so you're left with an unfortunate choice.
Right, thank you. So we'll move on to the questions now and hope that our speakers can answer them very, very quickly and keep them very, very brief, please, because we have a lot of questions. So, एक तो किसी ने पूछा था कि how aware is the government of this untapped resource? I can, take that one. The government is very aware. They even, they've set up special technology zones as well for tech-based startups. They've given them tax benefits, preferential tax, mechanisms. However, there is still a general understanding that startups need to, be fully compliant and be heavily regulated as regular companies, which I think is a bit unfair because startups are, generally, while they're in their ideation phases or early stage startups, they require a lot of hand-holding and require a lot of support, and so they should be entitled to certain special, treatment. The government is aware, however, there's this general, misconception around over-regulating startups. So I think that should be looked into. But we'll move on to the other questions if everybody can, quickly jump in. Whoever can take the questions, is welcome to speak. So there's a question. I would like to pitch an international investor, but unaware of how investors would take their returns from Pakistan, considering the state bank regulations and dollar instability. And there was a similar question on foreign exchange and repatriation of funds. Perhaps if anybody can respond to that. Do we have a favorable state
Can I give a
bank
quick
policy?
answer as to what I've seen there? I've done now at least 3 transactions where the foreign investor decided that repatriating funds from Pakistan is not relevant. And the reason is that if your holding company is in Dubai, Singapore, London, Delaware, wherever it is, that's where the value is increasing. So the question is simple. What funds are they looking to extract, repatriate out of Pakistan? Probably nothing. Because while the value is increasing in the holding company, the Pakistani operating company works on a budget. So $100 goes in, $100 gets spent. There's no profit or dividend usually to be repatriated. So foreign investors have, in a way, sort of decided that this is not a convenient law, but ironically, it doesn't actually align with the realities of VC investing.
Right. Taimur or Mubarak, if you have anything to disagree with,
I have
no,
there's nothing to disagree with. Altaf's completely correct. Whenever you're investing for capital gains, that you hope that the value of the shares will go up, and I'll sell my shares and I'll make some money, which is what startup investing primarily is, and private equity. I think this structure works. Even when they're investing in public markets, foreign investors have taken and repatriated funds. You can look at Contra and all. They've been big funds who've made quite a bit of money. There have been glitches and practical issues, but it's not like it hasn't happened. So Pakistan does allow repatriation. Sometimes there could be practical issues, but otherwise it usually does go through.
Right. So is there a way foreign investors feel legally comfortable investing in Pakistan-based startups? For example, what happens if the startup founders either disappear after taking money or fraudulently mismanage invested funds?
That can happen anywhere.
Yeah. So it's not fair to single out Pakistan.
And if that's the fear of the founder, I worry for their ability to raise funds.
Right. So do we have a standardized agreement for Pakistani companies where they can receive investments from friends and family immediately? So angel investors, if you can touch upon and how that works and how easy it is for people to invest in their friends and family businesses.
If you wish, I can take that. There are no standard documents. There are no standard structures. As a founder, I'm reluctant to raise from angel investors in Pakistan because you get the money, but you don't get it on the right terms, and you don't necessarily raise from institutional investors after that. So raising from angel investors usually works when that angel investor also understands how VC investment works. And there are very, very few of those in Pakistan, but if you can get it from them, that's great.
Right, so there was a similar question. What is the recommended legal structure for 2 or more individual investors investing in a Pakistan-based startups? I think it has more to do with a co-founders agreement, but does that necessarily concern VCs or investors? In founders ke beech mein kya agreement hui hui hai? Like, should the investors be concerned with that?
Mubarak, you want to take that one or?
Yeah, sure. I think, sorry, why don't you go ahead? I'll talk about the arbitration announcement.
Yeah, so unless Mubarak has more to add, my understanding is that the investor will do due diligence. They will look at shareholders agreements and put in place shareholder agreements, and they would like to see co-founder agreements. No one wants to talk about how things didn't go wrong, but the more you discuss it, document it, obviously it gives confidence.
Yeah, and if I can add, I think IP issues become very important when co-founders or more than one person is involved, because company ki IP, when it gets transferred to founders, then and if the IP needs to be transferred to a holdco later on, for example, then these kind of agreements between the people themselves becomes very relevant, because then you don't know actual kis individual ke paas intellectual property rights, and so that's also like one of the issues. So what are the typical lawyer fees for Pakistani startups trying to raise investments? So they do have external counsel, but they can also have in-house lawyers if they can afford it. But what are they paying them actually?
Not enough.
Yeah.
It really depends who you go to, right? It's not. I think one thing that people don't realize is that consultants are not commodities. Say if the price difference between consultant A versus consultant B is 50%, the output would not be 50% higher. Output would be significantly higher. Some legal work is mechanical. But a lot of the legal work requires expertise, and even lawyers would not delve into different areas that they have no experience in before. So understanding that and picking the right consultant, I think, is important. People who are more in demand to charge more than others, but typical fees is hard to ballpark.
But what do you think is better, having external counsel or having in-house counsel? And at what stage does in-house counsel become necessary for a startup to have?
Depends, depends on what you're doing. If you're doing SECP filing and all, your internal counsel can do it. You can have someone on retainer do that. But if you're doing something that's a little specialized, number one, I don't think Pakistan would have enough specialists to be employed in-house, and the specialists would then only be available externally. So I think you should use lawyers like you use doctors, where you don't go to the same doctor for every single issue that you have. You go to the dentist for your teeth, you go to a cardiologist for your heart, etc. So similarly, you need to treat lawyers the same way, depending on the complexity of the issue and depending on what kind of work is involved. You choose lawyers accordingly. And you should have an in-house counsel if you are in a regulated area and have very extensive regular legal work.
Right. There was another concern that I shared with the panelists earlier. So I heard from a few young lawyers that they're not comfortable working with startups because startups are not profitable, and it hurts their credibility when they're trying to advise investors or when they're trying to, pitch on their behalf. कि हम क्या pitch करें अगर ये profit ही नहीं बना रहे, like they're just, they're not proper companies. So this is like a general concern that I also came across amongst some of the young lawyers. So how relevant is that?
आप ना pitch करें, आप as a service provider service provide करें, और आप आगे
Yeah, I
चलें.
mean, they will
I
get
mean,
paid at the end of the day.
yeah. I mean, yeah, आप आगे या तो either, I mean, I would understand if financial advisors had this concern, but why are lawyers having this concern? You can just predominantly act as a lawyer and only pitch if you have to pitch a company, pitch the ones that you truly really believe in. Otherwise, don't.
Right. So maybe Altaf can take this one. So Altaf, what do you think commercial courts are they playing their part in enforcing contracts of an investor? And in the same vein, if you can talk about perhaps ADR or how commercial disputes would get settled if it involves startups or investors in Pakistan.
I mean, I'm sad to say that the issue with the courts, and to some extent arbitration, maybe not so much mediation, in Pakistan is not unique to the startup community. It's an issue for everyone, anyone looking to enforce contracts, foreign and domestic investors, etc. So, I mean, as a lawyer, I can give you a whole thesis on what it all means and how it all works. But as a founder, I would say just avoid it. You don't want to be in that space as much as you can. And if you can avoid the courts overall, and especially the courts in Pakistan, the better it is for you.
And again, I think you've answered this before, but if you quickly want to add another comment, what is the legal value or acceptance of e-signed documents, or in simple terms, a document printed, signed, and scanned?
So the Electronic Transactions Ordinance of 2002 came out during Musharraf's era. It is actually what enabled most of your online banking, amongst other things. It is perfectly legal and valid. It reflects what the situation would be in the EU and in the US. There are
This is different from electronic signatures, or is it the same?
It's the same. So electronic signatures is not an image of a signature. Electronic signature is actually the way that a document is locked with an algorithm so that you can identify a fraudulent and original document. So scanning it with a picture is not an electronic signature, at least per the law. So that's why you have electronic signature providers all around the world, deploying various technology at various sophistications and levels. That is available in Pakistan, both the technology and the law, but old habits die hard. So people like me in Pakistan, we're trying to change the system as much as we can. Sometimes it feels like you're clawing inches. Sometimes it feels like miles. That's the life of an entrepreneur.
Right. So somebody's asked, when we talk about Web3 and cryptocurrency, bearing in mind its deregulation, how better can we regulate the investments done in these spaces, particularly when we have departments which are undervalued and have less workforce? And I hope all understand as lawyers that we have an inclination towards hoarding cash. How could we not see this hoarding of cash in these setups, crypto or otherwise, as black? Mubarak said last time that he doesn't mind being paid in crypto. So like, let us know if that's changed in the past 6 months.
No, that hasn't changed much actually, but the point still remains that there are two aspects to this, right? First is hoarding cash, this eternal our thing that somehow crypto would just make black money more pervasive, people will not pay tax, as if abhi sab tax bhar rahe hain aur abhi koi black economy nahi hai, right? Crypto or not, those things you have to stop anyway. You haven't been able to stop in this so advanced and matured financial infrastructure, global financial infrastructure with the USD, etc. आज भी hot money एकदम से निकल जाता है, dollar rate पर चढ़ जाते हैं. Nobody can explain why, even though everyone knows how. So I don't think crypto can be really truly blamed for that. When we talk about regulation, we just talk about allowing some use cases to begin with, right? I'm not saying let people. I'm also not fully in favor of having a open regime where anyone can start coins and tokens, etc., because I feel like this market is still not ready. Pakistani investor is not ready either. Generally,
would you recommend a sandbox first, perhaps?
Yeah, a sandbox के अलावा भी just allow an exchange with say the stable, quote unquote stable coins. I know जब भी हम उसकी बात करते हैं crypto, everyone talks about how much money people have just lost in crypto, etc. How much money have people lost by keeping PKR? How much money people have lost in Pakistan stock exchange? So the point is, these things are and will remain volatile. I'm not saying we need to allow it completely, but we can allow certain restrictive use cases.
Right.
Sorry,
So
can I just add
yeah,
very quickly to
yeah,
what
sure.
Mubarak has said? Because Mubarak said something earlier, which I do want to pick up on. He said there's no innovation in regulation. So what my main issue is, I mean, asking us what the laws should be is kind of pointless. We're not making the laws. We don't have much influence in
We
changing
are.
laws.
I'm part of the committee. I will have to make the law.
I wish you the best of luck. I mean, I've had my own experience with these things, but what I'm trying to say is, it's a mindset issue. All of this comes from a law dating in 1947. We need to just stop trying to control the borders, and by that monitoring 20% of payment flows and 80% sort of leaks everywhere. There needs to be a complete paradigm shift, and until we don't do that, I don't see you as leapfrogging these sort of situations.
Right. So, so many questions. What are the tax benefits to startups in Pakistan?
I mean, I'll just go for it.
No, go ahead, Mubarak.
Go ahead, just maybe.
No, so one is STZA and the other one was FBR's, like your 5-year tax holiday for IT businesses. Those are the two big ones. But I'll let Altaf
But that
add more.
tax holiday keeps changing with every change in government. Unfortunately, to be 5
नहीं,
years.
from what I recall,
3 years.
अभी भी वो 5 साल की है. Pakistan Software Export Board से अगर आप register करें, you can still get that 5-year holiday. From what I recall.
That's only for the software export board.
हाँ, उसकी approval चाहिए होता है, but you have to prove that you're an IT company. And once they approve it, then you get that holiday.
Yeah. So, how can one enforce IP or trademark in Pakistan? Like, especially if it's a startup, what should they be looking at when it comes to IP and trademarks?
So very quickly, just to demystify this, software is not IP protected. So let's everybody be clear about that. What we're talking about here is someone's logo, someone's name, various aspects of design, but it's limited. And even if you have it, fine, you register it with the IPO, the Intellectual Property Office of Pakistan, and then you go to court and you enforce it physically in the market. So it involves a lot of money, it involves a lot of effort. But please, one thing I just want to also demystify, this is the same everywhere in the world. It's not unique to Pakistan. This is the process everywhere. The reason why Coke and Pepsi and Nike are strong, because they enforce their IP with huge budgets all around the world. And that's the same perspective you have to take with this. But IT companies are unique. The technology itself may have very limited IP protection rights in Pakistan. Elsewhere, maybe a little bit better. But you should not be trying to rely on IP in order to sort of conquer a market or dominate a market.
Yeah, and I don't mean to alarm anyone, but a teacher once told me that somebody's source code was actually, stolen from the IP office while it was still there. So, as the incidences we were. But what do you generally think about NDAs? So, if a startup has a product that involves IP in some form or the other, should they be signing NDAs when they're pitching to investors?
Just let me quickly answer as a founder, no. Because your job as a founder is to promote your business, not keep it confidential. So, and having an NDA in certain circumstances, like with your competitor, or something sensitive with a third party that is not an investor, you can think about these things. But focusing too much on making things confidential is not going to take off, make your startup take off.
Also, chances are you don't really have anything super unique that you're hiding.
Yeah.
So be very make that trade-off quickly.
Yeah. So since I work with the VC fund, I can also, add to that there isn't anything that they haven't seen before. And like VCs go through hundreds of pitch decks almost every day. So You know, I feel like NDAs at the very beginning, while you're still talking, it's pretty flexible, and it depends on whether people actually do want to go ahead with it at a later stage, perhaps. How much private equity activity have you seen in Pakistan lately, and what is the future likely to hold? And there was another question regarding, you know, if we have any figures around how much investment has actually come into Pakistani startups.
So if I could take this. So I
Yeah.
think till date, we have the figure is 700 and something million for over since the beginning or end of 2019. In terms of private equity, I do think that is the missing form of capital in Pakistan. We can have far more successful businesses in private equity than otherwise, but I do not see a whole lot of funds coming into this area. We could do with significantly more capital dedicated to private equity in Pakistan, both small and large.
So, and just to add, the issue in private equity is not the lack of funds, or it isn't to that extent. The issue is the lack of targets and owners of businesses willing to sell those targets.
Right. There are two questions related to insurance. If I don't get the insurance done initially, because obviously we don't have much funds, would it be a problem? So it's kind of like the same thing with IP, like, or hiring of lawyers or any services for that matter. Like startups are startups at the end of the day. Should they be, how you know, heavily should they be focusing on compliance and risk associated areas, and insurance especially?
I would echo what Taimur and Juan has already said about having your house in order for an investor. So doing everything you can in terms of compliance, documentation, etc., for due diligence. But in that context, I'm not sure what role insurance plays. So I'm not sure what insurance they're actually looking for or what they would put in place. I don't know if that's unique to their business, but I have yet to come across a startup who had insurance needs.
Do you think there are services like this where VCs can help startups at a later stage in securing these kind of services at a, you know, later on?
Yes, but not necessarily in Pakistan.
Right. Which holdcos would you recommend? Dubai, Singapore, Delaware, or others? I mean, the fact that somebody is asking this is only shows that they've already, you know, written off Pakistan. So which holdcos would you recommend?
Based on my conversation with the startup only 2 hours ago, follow the money. So wherever the investor says, that's where you go. I mean, doing it before the investor, in my mind, really doesn't seem to make sense.
Right.
For me, I think depends on, again, like depends on where most of the investors are comfortable. Number one. Number two, you could also have a look at, say, for example, if you do intend on applying to Y Combinator, they only have 4 jurisdictions that they allow. I wrote a whole thread on this. You could also go through that. But my recommendation generally is that Singapore is what I've seen the most favored across the board by most set of investors, Asian, Middle East, US, etc. So yeah, for me, Singapore seems to be the destination of choice. But of course, if your investors are requiring MENA, etc., you can go ADGM as well.
Right. So State Bank of Pakistan doesn't allow investments in local opcos if offshore holdco is organized without informing them, which delays inward flow of money and impacts the startup significantly. What are the best practices to avoid this?
Set up the holdco with the relevant procedure mandated. Simple.
Yeah.
But let me just add, I mean, we all know this, that if you set up the company without the procedure, without the approval, it is extremely painful to regularize it, if that's a term I can use here. Yeah.
So how do startups and investors come up with valuations? Like in very simple layperson terms, please.
If I could go first, it's generally global comparables. You look at the similar business in another market, you add a discount to the market that you're operating in, and the stage you're at and the numbers you're showing, and then you go ahead with that. They also look at the kind of dilution that you expect, and say if this business is going to lead to a significant amount of dilution or significant amount of capital that needs to be raised, then to avoid diluting the founders early on, they do take a little bit of extra, like they do give a higher valuation upfront. So if you want to just talk about very broad strokes, this is how valuations are done.
Right. Altaf, unless you have anything to add, we just have a couple of more questions and we're almost, pressed for time. How much do we need to understand the economic situation of the country where the investors have to rightly need to invest, if not money, but time and energy in the ideation stage for a startup? Like how much do we need to understand the economic situation of the country before investors invest?
So if I understand the question correctly, I think, the biggest issue that comes to mind is market size and how long it will take you to take a large portion of that market size, and obviously that's dominated by the economics. But let me just add a sort of practical tip here, and that's one that I adopted myself. When you go about trying to write your pitch deck, it's a very, very difficult process. Even for those who are MBA and analyst qualified, it's not an easy task. So I actually went to a consultant and underwent the pitch deck elements that I was not comfortable with. So market sizing, economics, certain aspects is not my forte. And so you go to the right expertise. So it's not necessarily something you have to do entirely on your own.
Are there any, global reports or any organizations writing these reports that you would recommend?
What
No.
kind of reports?
Sorry,
I'm not clear. What report?
In terms of understanding the economic situation of a country, like is there a World Bank report or anything that we should be looking at? Any resources?
There are quite a few, in my opinion. Like I think Atlantic Council did a report recently on especially in this space and what the issues we are facing, and just had a whole macro element to it as well. Similarly, I do recall Eye2Eye regularly has these kind of reports as well. So I have seen quite a few of these. Uske alawa, I think just wait out for any credible source to go for and rely on those reports for macro level data and analysis.
Right, and we still have to address an elephant in the room. So startups that failed, did they have bad legal advisors? What was the legal strategy? And how can our legal system ensure that this doesn't happen again, or there is more transparency?
I have my views on it. If Altaf wants to go first, then I can go as
well. In answer to the question, exactly, no, I don't think it was a legal advisory issue. Number two, failure is not a bad thing. That comes with this territory. It might be big.
But doesn't it leave like a huge gap in the country for like a lot of things? Potentially,
because we're obviously in a fragile position. But we can't mourn every failure. That's not the point of this. We have to actually understand that will happen quite a bit. But I don't see it as a legal issue. And again, Mubarak is saying the same thing that I'm feeling, which is that we all have our views. My own view was that it's an unsustainable business model, primarily.
So no, there's two kinds of failures over here, right? One is macroeconomic failure. So if you're running a business model that requires a significant amount of capital, I think that was Airlip. I think it was largely down to, while there are all sorts of rumors around, but primarily it was down to the macro situation being what it was, and the funding for that entire segment across the world dying down. Could they have been more capital efficient? Yeah, of course, but you can always be a Monday morning quarterback and call out how things could have been done differently. Had these guys been a quarter earlier and raised the big round, I think everyone would be calling them geniuses, etc. So एक तो उस तरह का failure होता है, फिर दूसरा failure होता है where you've had completely self-inflicted issues where it had nothing to do with the macroeconomic situation. You had 10 million, 15 million in your bank account, yet you just could not manage egos, and because of the internal turmoil you fell down. That is what I'm more scared of. That is the kind of failure that that would bring the market down, as opposed to anything that is happening because of the macro situation. Could there be? I mean, in either case, I don't think it's any legal advice issue, because if either party thought that what they're doing is legally okay, then I mean that's just common sense in most cases. But can founders put more effort into understanding governance and put more effort into understanding how when you raise other people's money, the liability or your responsibility increases? Yeah, of course. I think a lot of founders that I've interacted with, and I've interacted with quite a few, I don't think still fully appreciate the duty that they owe now, and the kind of stuff that they need to do from a legal and regulatory perspective. So yeah, it would have to be a bit of both, but I would not attribute these failures down to any legal issue as such.
Right, and just to add to that, are there any other mistakes that founders should be looking out for?
Anusha, if I can maybe take that.
Yes.
Look,
yes.
I don't know if it's been, thank you, if it's been discussed, we often see that the founders or co-founders don't sign proper founders agreement or shareholders agreement amongst themselves. Or even if they do sign such agreement, they don't try to capture all possible eventualities. Pakistan, we've seen with many of the startups that some of the initial co-founders will leave the startup. So if the startup equity was divided equally without any exit strategy, in case one of the co-founders becomes inactive or leaves to do something else, how do you deal with those situations? So I think people start many of these startups based on trust amongst friends or family members, and then very quickly, in many cases, it doesn't pan out like that. So I think what founders must
and if you can just add to this, exit is it better to legally close the company or just close the physical operations and leave the registered name dangling? So
I think it's important to close
in terms of
absolutely, because the legal responsibility is not going away. I mean, the tax man can legally look at, I think, for up to 5 years prior financial statements and issue tax notices. In Saudi, we saw Kareem being slapped with 100 million real fines, right? For something done many years ago. It can happen in Pakistan as well. So, and by the way, in many cases, we expect it to happen, because wo jo Altaf ne shuru mein baat ki, in some cases, the way funds are being taken outside, news is being splashed about fundraising, but money is not being recorded properly in Pakistan, or how it's being, there are a lot of legal gaps between the marketing story and the pitch about valuations and all that, and what's actually happening. If you're transferring shares on after publicly claiming to have a valuation of $30 million, $50 million, and you're not paying capital gains, you will be in trouble eventually, right? Or other things, right? So there may be some exemptions available if you qualify for them under the IT sector and so on. But you need proper legal, tax, and audit accounting advice on these issues. So I think founders, I don't intend to scare them, but just getting your IP rights registered, your company registered, having an employment contract template, having a basic shareholders agreement template, and copy pasting terms and conditions for your website from somewhere else and making minor modifications, that's not the legal stuff that you want any of us to be helping you with. You can do it with somebody else. But what you really need is proper strategic advice, as a partner who helps you define your strategy, evaluate your legal risk, and make you a sustainable business, because solutions of today are problems of tomorrow. So if you are, as to use Altaf's words earlier, if you are doing jugards in Pakistan, in the startup ecosystem, like everything else and everywhere else in Pakistan, then they're bound to be legal and other issues down the road. You're just deferring them for the time being. So I think people really need to think these through. And I would again urge, regardless of who you use, unfortunately, it's still a very small community of lawyers in Pakistan who have experience of advising on these issues. But hopefully more will come up if startups start using other people, startups start using lawyers properly, right? So this is what I would encourage.
I
Right.
just want to add
Ali,
to what
yeah, Ali, stop sending us any more questions. We're almost, we're just wrapping up. We just have a few questions lined up, unless you are giving us more time. But I don't think we have room for any more questions. But just going to wrap up, the ones that we already have. Yes,
just very quickly, Anusha, I was just going to say, ultimately, most startups that we can think of want to get rich by selling the company. As simple as that. But when you ask them, what is the process of selling the company? How does it work? They don't know. And I find that often quite surprising, that where you are going to get rich, you haven't actually figured it out. And does that mean that you have to do a mini MBA and a mini LLB? Well, being an entrepreneur as a jack of all trades, you do have to do that. And if you don't know how that works, and you're not going out to, the panelists here who know what they're doing, then ultimately you have to ask yourself, how much value are you building in your startup?
Right. Are there any barriers?
Sorry, I think it's a very important point that Altaf just made. You have to think of your exit strategy on day one and plan your structure accordingly. Are you going to an exit in Pakistan, in Singapore, UAE, or in Delaware? Are you going to do an IPO of your ultimate holding company or your local OPCO in Pakistan or in some other jurisdiction? Do you ever plan to expand out of Pakistan into other countries in the region? How will that all fit into your structure? You need to think these things through when you are developing your technology as well, right? So the tech part is it's not the business. Tech can be developed by many others, perhaps a better tech can be developed, right? It's bringing all these things together, the idea, the legal structuring, your exit strategies, your business plan, and all together with the technology that will make a successful startup.
Yeah, and it's not just relevant to startups. The same goes for VCs as well, who are trying to raise funds here. They think of their exit strategy from day one. Right. So what are the barriers and prospects for equity crowdfunding platforms in Pakistan? Is crowdfunding legal? Are the platforms, do they run into any legal issues?
It's not currently legal, if I may take this. But just to add my personal opinion on this, I really, truly don't think Pakistan is ready for equity crowdfunding, especially for private companies. Given private companies have far less scrutiny, far less transparency. Imagine if Airlift or Tag, the failures that we talk about, if they had like thousands of shareholders, which was also public, right? I truly don't think our retail investors are ready for it. While the equity crowdfunding is not allowed, I do not think it is a pressing problem for a country like Pakistan.
Right. How aligned are our regulations with international standards? Like setting up a VC fund in Pakistan requires registration with SECP and getting NBFC license, and getting these licenses is very time consuming. What do you think about these processes, and how much effective modus operandi of public regulators or agencies have? So a bit about setting up VC funds with SECP and NBFC approvals. How easy is that?
Well, I'll let Altaf take this perhaps, but what I would say, these are some of these are very interesting questions, and perhaps deviating a bit from today's topic. And by the way, Anusha and Ali, I would request that maybe we should do another session soon with a more broader topic. Maybe we keep it open-ended on different issues, because they clearly, I can see, a lot of questions that, that we can still talk about for hours. So I don't know, again, this question is also, can be answered in many different ways, but Altaf, over to you.
A very simple answer. Pakistan looks to the international markets to generate its own laws. So I'm not worried about getting laws, or even to some extent the quality. There are some big departures from what I would say are good quality laws, but overall it's fine. The bigger issue is the mindset. The bigger issue is the logistical realities of the ground on the ground. So I'm not worried about getting more laws or necessarily even improving more laws, subject to a few. I'm more about changing mindsets and bringing some paradigm shifts in the situation here in Pakistan.
Right. When should one incorporate the business? So should a startup be registered from day one, or should they wait for funding, or should they be, more established first before finally incorporating?
My quick answer to that is, depends on how serious you are. But if you're looking to sell your business, then obviously from day one.
And you need to accordingly have your contracts properly done with your entity. They shouldn't be in personal names. Also, I've seen a trend of companies being established initially in the name of the father or the friend's father or a cousin or something. It doesn't work like that, right? You need to really be sure of yourself as entrepreneurs, come forward, register things properly, and get everything documented.
Taimur is very heavy-handed with the legal compliances today.
No,
the
because
startups
I've
should get
seen
a bit
that,
of
right?
special treatment also.
Well, I mean, there is no special treatment under the law. That's the reality, right? So, and that's why Mubarak was saying we are perhaps not ready for crowdfunding platforms. You don't want a minor retail investor to go and then ask a civil court in Lahore for a stay order, and put the entire crowdfunding platform in jeopardy. So we have to be very conscious of these things, help the ecosystem develop, right? We've been at it forever. My own first startup was in 1999, right? So of which I was the founder. So much before I became a lawyer. So I think, and both of Altaf and Mubarak are also co-founders of startups. So we're not just lawyers. So we appreciate that. We've learned from our own mistakes perhaps as well. And yeah, let's see, a lot needs to be done. And we are happy to collaborate and help the ecosystem develop accordingly.
Yep. Are there any legal tech startups in Pakistan? Well, quoting the law is one, and we were featured on the Global Legal Tech Report. We were the only one from Pakistan that was featured in the official report. All our business models and operational models are there. The report it costs about $1,000, but if you'd like to get a free copy, I'd be happy to share one. So last question, and it's all, there are three questions, but they're all similar. What is the easiest way to invest in Pakistani startups? That's more like a finance question, but if you can speak from a legal point of view. And similarly, what are the areas in startup law that need to be defined in Pakistan? And is there a website for Legal 101 for Pakistani startups? The last question here, Legal 101. I think they've gotten so much advice from this session alone. We would charge, a lot of money for what we're talking about today.
No, I'll just answer this and drop off, and then I'll leave to the other esteemed panelists.
Sure, this is the last question.
To handle this. Look, I think you can find a lot of material online. Pakistan and startup world is not very different from what the international markets have to offer, but everything needs to be tailored according to Pakistani rules and regulations. And likewise, if your company is in Delaware or Singapore, you have to make sure, or Dubai, you have to make sure that you have local law advice there as well. And if your website is hosted out of some other country, you can't just use the terms and conditions, privacy policy, etc., out of Pakistan for that purpose. European Union has GDPR, for example. You need to be conscious of what you are doing, who are your intended customers or website visitors and parties you interact with, and accordingly tailor everything around that. So, but I hope that eventually some basic documentation will be available online. Again, happy to collaborate with everyone and contribute to that process. But at the moment, I can't think of, a reliable Pakistan-focused place where there will be sample agreements of all sorts available. But maybe Mubarak knows about something, or Altaf. But thank you. It's been great being on this panel, and hope to do another one soon.
Right, thank you. Mubarak, would you like to turn your tweets into a book?
I don't know about books. I don't think a lot of people read books, but I'll stick to the tweets for now. The thing, as far as resources are concerned, I think there's several guides have come out. Eye to Eye, again, I'm referring to them. They put guides. Courting the Law is for lawyers, but I have read many articles there. But that's more in-depth legal stuff. If you talk about sample agreements, no, I haven't come across any website with a lot of sample agreements, especially free or say Pakistan 101. In terms of SECP, does do some guides as well of their own, say company incorporation, etc. They have their guides. So there are some, this scattered, it's not collected in one place. But generally, most of these things are not very difficult. And like I agree with what Taimur said about it not being too different from most parts of the world. You just need to tailor it to Pakistan. So commercially, things are fairly simple and straightforward, and they're same as across the world. But in terms of just tailoring it to Pakistan, would require you to engage a lawyer.
Right. Altaf, any final thoughts?
Well, maybe as the founder again. So VUCLA and Pakistan looked at sort of automating. We are going to automate agreements more and more. But we did look at sort of startup agreements and all that, but it's just very difficult to come up with a standardization version that is applicable to all, one size fits all. I mean, it's a work in progress. Maybe one day we do figure it out. But I would also say that, I want to be a little bit blunt here. I mean, I don't know if Mubarak necessarily agrees here, but there's a clerky, for example, in the US, but there's a big market for it. People are willing to pay $100 for what clerky offers, even on an online subscription basis or whatever the amount is. We're talking about people here who don't want to pay lawyers, who don't want to, they want to find jugars to everything. And they expect lawyers to then prepare standardized templates given away for free on some online portal. So you can't have it both ways. You can't expect the free resource and it'd be perfect for your needs. But when it comes to paying for legal advice and whatever else, there's a certain reluctance to do something.
Right, thank you very much. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you for Pak Launch. Thank you to Pak Launch for having us and letting us host this session. Thank you to the audience for so many engaging questions. You've gotten a lot of free legal advice today. So I hope you made the most of it. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.